I remember that night vividly. The air was thick with the scent of impending rain, and the distant rumble of thunder mirrored the turmoil within me. Michael and I had been married for 15 years, our lives intertwined in a dance of routine and familiarity. Yet, beneath the surface, I felt an ache, a longing for something more, something that would awaken the parts of me that had lain dormant for so long. As I stood by the window, watching the raindrops begin to trace patterns on the glass, my phone buzzed, a message from Daniel Harper. Daniel, with his easy smile and infectious energy, had re-entered our lives unexpectedly, stirring memories of a time when spontaneity and passion were the colors of my world. His words on the screen were simple, yet they ignited a spark. "Let's catch up tonight." I glanced at Michael, engrossed in his work, the glow of the computer screen casting a pale light on his face. We had become comfortable, perhaps too comfortable, in our parallel existences. The idea of stepping out, of embracing the unknown, was both exhilarating and terrifying. The cafe Daniel had chosen was warm and inviting, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingling with the soft hum of conversation. When he saw me, his eyes lit up, and for a moment, I felt seen, truly seen, in a way I hadn't in years. We talked for hours, laughter and shared stories bridging the gap time had carved between us. As the evening wore on, Daniel suggested a walk along the river. The city lights danced on the water's surface, and the cool breeze carried the promise of adventure. With each step, the weight of my responsibilities seemed to lighten, replaced by a sense of freedom I hadn't realized I craved. At a secluded spot, Daniel turned to me, his expression serious yet tender. "Laura," he said softly, "life is too short to live without passion. You deserve to feel alive." His words resonated deep within me, awakening desires I had long suppressed. In that moment, the world seemed to pause, the distant sounds of the city fading into the background, the cool night air wrapping around us like a cocoon. I was faced with a choice: to continue along the safe, predictable path I had always known, or to step into the unknown, embracing the possibility of rediscovering myself. The journey that began that night would lead me to places I never imagined, challenging my perceptions of love, loyalty, and identity. It was a night to remember, a journey beyond the familiar. Before we dive deeper into this story today, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying this journey, and give this video thumbs up. Your support energized us for sharing these intimate stories, and remember to turn on notifications so you won't miss any future episode. It began with the rain. That night, the air felt different, heavy, electric, as if the world itself knew what was about to happen. I didn't. Not yet. I remember standing at the window, watching the drops streak down the glass, tracing them like they were pathways I couldn't take. Inside, the house was quiet. Too quiet. Michael was in the other room, the sound of his typing faint and steady. And I was here, waiting. When my phone buzzed, I wasn't expecting much. Maybe a work email, maybe a group chat. But the name that lit up the screen, it stopped me in my tracks. Daniel Harper. Michael's friend. Someone I hadn't thought about in years. Daniel. He had a way of standing out, even in a room full of people. There was always something about him, confidence, charm, energy that made you notice him. It was effortless for him, magnetic, even. When I saw his name, it was like something shifted. Something in me that I hadn't felt in a long time. The message was simple. Casual. Harmless, really. "Let's catch up tonight." I could have ignored it. I should have. But instead, I stared at the words, letting them settle into the spaces I didn't want to admit were empty. And before I could stop myself, I typed back, "Where and when?" Michael didn't notice. He didn't look up from his laptop or ask why I was suddenly in such a hurry to leave. I think a part of me wanted him to stop me. But he didn't. So, I left. The cafe Daniel chose was one I'd passed 100 times but never stepped into. It was small, tucked away on a quiet street, the kind of place where people went to disappear for a while. The smell of coffee greeted me the moment I walked in, warm and inviting, masking the cold I carried inside. And then there he was. Daniel. Sitting at a corner table, his back to the wall like he always had to have the best view of the room. He looked up when I walked in, and that smile, it was like he hadn't missed a beat. Like no time had passed at all. We talked for hours. About old times, about nothing in particular. He laughed the way I remembered, effortless, contagious. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I laughed, too. Really laughed. I didn't want the night to end. And I didn't realize how much I needed that feeling, until it was too late. When I look back on it now, I can see the moment it all began. The moment I chose to answer that message. The moment I walked out of my door and into something I couldn't take back. I thought it was just a harmless escape. A chance to remember who I used to be. But that night, that choice, it led me here, to this. Hello. Hello. Please. Please send someone quickly. There's blood. Oh my God, there's so much blood. They're still here. Oh my God, they're still here. That was the night everything changed. The night I thought I could escape the life I'd built. The night I realized how wrong I was. Every morning started the same way. The alarm buzzed at 6:30 a.m., cutting through the stillness of the house. I'd get out of bed, make the coffee, pack Michael's lunch, and sit by the window with my mug while he hurried to get ready for work. The routine was predictable. Safe. And it never changed. Michael liked his mornings quiet. He'd grab his coffee, kiss me on the cheek, just a quick peck, like we were signing off on a contract, and head out the door. By 7:15, I'd be alone again, left to fill the hours until he came back. The house would settle into its silence, but I couldn't seem to settle at all. I would tell myself it was normal. That after 15 years, this was just how marriage worked. You become companions, partners, cohabitants. And maybe that was enough. Maybe it should have been enough. But there was a restlessness in me I couldn't shake. I'd spend hours scrolling through social media or flipping through old photo albums, searching for something. A spark, a reminder of the person I used to be before life became so neatly contained. Michael wasn't a bad man. He worked hard. He cared in his own way. But we'd stopped seeing each other. Stopped hearing each other. I don't know when it happened, exactly when we drifted from soulmates to strangers living under the same roof. It was during one of those quiet evenings, at one of Michael's work gatherings, when I saw him again. Daniel Harper. He was leaning against the kitchen counter, holding a glass of wine, telling some story that had everyone laughing. He hadn't changed much since I'd last seen him, still confident, still quick with a joke, still the kind of person who made you feel at ease just by being in the room. I remember watching the way he moved, the way he seemed to draw people toward him. He had this energy about him, effortless, magnetic. It wasn't the first time I'd noticed it. Years ago, before Michael and I were even married, I'd felt it too. Back then, I'd brushed it off, convinced myself it was nothing. But now, standing in that crowded kitchen, it was harder to ignore. Michael introduced us like it was the first time, though Daniel and I had met years before. He smiled, that same easy smile, and said, "Laura, you haven't aged a day." It was just a line, a harmless compliment, but the way he said it, it lingered. I told myself it was nothing. Just friendly banter, the kind of thing people say at these events to pass the time. But as the night went on, I found myself drawn to him, his stories, his laughter, the way he seemed to notice little things about people that no one else did. Michael spent most of the evening with his colleagues, talking about numbers and deadlines and things I didn't understand. I stood by the kitchen counter, listening to Daniel, laughing at his jokes, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of being seen. I didn't think much of it at the time. A casual conversation, a harmless connection. That's all it was, right? Just a moment of lightness in an otherwise heavy, predictable world. I didn't know then how much that moment would change. How much it would set in motion. But looking back now, I can see it clearly, how the cracks in my perfect life began to widen, one subtle moment at a time. While you are enjoying this interesting story, wouldn't you mind subscribing to the channel already? It started with a message. Simple, casual, unassuming. Daniel's name lit up my phone late one evening, just as I was settling into the quiet of the house. His words felt familiar, yet they carried a weight I couldn't quite explain. "Hey, Laura. It's been a while. How's life?" I remember staring at those words for longer than I should have. It wasn't unusual for old acquaintances to reach out, it happened all the time, didn't it? A like on a photo, a quick message to catch up. Harmless. That's what I told myself as I typed back, "Hi, Daniel. It's been ages. I'm good, thanks. You?" His reply was instant, like he'd been waiting. He asked about Michael, about our life. He said we should catch up sometime, in person. And even as my fingers hovered over the screen, my mind racing with reasons to say no, I found myself agreeing. I didn't tell Michael about the message. I didn't think I needed to. It was just a coffee, after all, an innocent catch-up with an old friend. That's what I kept telling myself, over and over, as I got dressed the next day and walked out the door without a word. The cafe was small, tucked away on a quiet street I rarely visited. Daniel was already there when I arrived, sitting by the window with a coffee in hand. When he saw me, his smile lit up the room, and for a moment, I forgot all the reasons why I shouldn't have come. We talked about everything, his work, his travels, the little moments that had filled the years since we'd last seen each other. He made me laugh in a way I hadn't in so long, made me feel like I was more than just a wife, more than just someone going through the motions. I didn't want the conversation to end. And when he suggested we meet again, I didn't hesitate. It felt easy, comfortable, like stepping into a part of myself I'd almost forgotten existed. At first, it was innocent, coffee dates, long conversations about nothing in particular. But then the messages became more frequent. The calls started coming late at night, when Michael was asleep and the house was still. I'd sit in the living room, my voice low, my heart racing, as Daniel's words wrapped around me like a secret I didn't want to share. Each time we spoke, I told myself it was harmless, that I could keep it under control. But deep down, I knew. I knew the way his voice made me feel, the way I looked forward to hearing from him, wasn't something I could explain away. The first time we met somewhere other than that cafe, it was late. A quiet park on the edge of the city. The air was cool, the sky clear, and Daniel was waiting for me under the glow of a street lamp. When I saw him, my heart skipped in a way that felt both terrifying and exhilarating. He didn't say much at first, just smiled that easy, familiar smile. And as we walked, side by side, talking about everything and nothing, I felt a sense of freedom I hadn't known in years. A part of me came alive in those moments, even as another part of me, deeper, quieter, whispered warnings I chose to ignore. Each time I met him, the guilt would creep in on my way home. I'd see Michael, sitting at the kitchen table, oblivious to where I'd been, and the weight of what I was doing would settle on my chest. But then my phone would buzz, another message from Daniel, and the guilt would melt away, replaced by something I couldn't resist. It wasn't just the excitement. It was the way Daniel made me feel, alive, important, seen. It was something I hadn't felt in so long, something I didn't know I was still capable of feeling. I told myself it would end eventually, that I'd find a way to stop before things went too far. But the truth is, I didn't want it to end. Not yet. And every time I met him, every time I answered his messages, I was taking one step further down a path I couldn't turn back from. I thought I was in control. I thought I could keep my life intact while holding on to this one piece of something else. But I was wrong. I thought I was careful. I thought I was in control. I thought Michael would never notice. But the truth is, you can only keep a secret for so long before it starts to show, no matter how hard you try to hide it. It was little things at first, subtle shifts I didn't even realize were happening. I started coming home later than usual. My phone became an extension of my hand, always within reach, always with the screen turned down. And Michael was paying attention, even when I thought he wasn't. One evening, I walked into the kitchen to find him holding a receipt. It was from the cafe where Daniel and I had met, dated for a day. I told Michael I'd been running errands. He didn't say anything at first, just held it up, his eyes searching mine for an explanation. I laughed it off, told him it was nothing, that I'd stopped for coffee while I was out. He didn't press me on it, not then. He just nodded, but the look in his eyes. I should have known he wasn't convinced. After that, he started noticing more. The way I'd step out of the room to take certain calls, the way I'd go quiet when my phone buzzed late at night. I told myself it didn't matter, that he wouldn't put it together. But the truth was, he already had. It came to a head one night when I was sitting on the couch, texting Daniel. Michael was in the next room, but I could feel him watching me. When I put my phone down and turned around, he was standing there, his arms crossed, his expression harder than I'd ever seen it before. He didn't yell. He didn't accuse. He just asked a question. "Who are you texting?" It was the calmness in his voice that made my stomach twist, because I knew he already knew the answer. I told him it was work. A friend. Anything but the truth. But he didn't buy it. He reached for my phone, and for a moment, we both froze, staring at each other, daring the other to move. And then he said it. "Is it Daniel?" My heart sank. I could have lied again, could have kept the charade going. But the look in his eyes. I couldn't do it. So I said it. The words I knew would shatter everything. Yes. He didn't yell. He didn't throw things. He just stood there, staring at me like he didn't recognize the person standing in front of him. And for the first time, I saw the pain I'd been trying so hard not to think about. I saw what I'd done to him. I tried to explain, to tell him it wasn't what he thought, that it didn't mean what he thought it did. But he didn't want to hear it. He told me I'd betrayed him, betrayed us, and he wasn't wrong. We argued for hours, our voices rising and falling, words thrown like weapons we couldn't take back. He asked me how long it had been going on, why I didn't come to him when I felt like this, why I'd turned to someone else instead of him. And all I could do was stand there, trying to piece together answers I didn't even have for myself. I told him I was sorry, that I didn't mean for it to happen, that I still loved him. But even as I said the words, I wasn't sure if I believed them. And the way he looked at me, I knew he didn't believe them, either. That night, we slept in separate rooms for the first time in 15 years. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every choice that had brought us to this point, every moment where I could have turned back and didn't. I wanted to go to him, to fix it, to make it better somehow. But the space between us felt insurmountable, like a wall I'd built with my own hands. And for the first time, I realized. I wasn't sure if we could come back from this. Michael didn't deserve this. I knew that. And yet, I couldn't undo what I'd done. I couldn't take back the choices I'd made or the pain I'd caused. All I could do was sit with it, and wonder if the pieces of our life could ever be put back together. While you are enjoying this interesting story, wouldn't you mind subscribing to the channel already? It was a cold night, the kind that wraps you in silence. The air had a sharpness to it, and the streets were almost empty. I'd told Michael I had a late meeting, but as I walked out the door, I could feel his eyes on me. He didn't say anything, but his silence carried a weight I couldn't ignore. Daniel had asked me to meet him at a small bar on the edge of town, one we'd been to before. It was quiet, tucked away, a place where we wouldn't be seen. I'd told myself this would be the last time, that I needed to end it. But as I walked through the door and saw him sitting there, waiting for me, I felt the pull again, the warmth, the escape, the sense of being someone else, just for a little while. We sat in a corner booth, away from the others. He smiled as I slid into the seat across from him, his eyes meeting mine with that familiar mix of charm and curiosity. We talked, like we always did, about nothing and everything, the conversation flowing easily, as if the rest of the world didn't exist. But it did exist. Michael existed. And as the minutes turned into hours, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. That somewhere, somehow, the balance had tipped. I didn't know Michael had followed me. That he'd seen the messages, put the pieces together, and decided to find me. He didn't tell me he was coming. He didn't give me a warning. All I knew was the sudden sound of the door swinging open, the cold rush of air as he stepped inside, and the way his eyes locked onto us from across the room. He walked toward us, slow and deliberate, his face a mask of anger I'd never seen before. Daniel turned first, his expression shifting from confusion to realization in an instant. And me. I froze. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't do anything but watch as Michael reached our table. "So this is where you've been," he said, his voice low but sharp, cutting through the noise of the bar. He wasn't yelling, not yet, but there was a tension in his words, like a storm building just beneath the surface. I tried to respond, to explain, but he cut me off. Don't. Just don't. Daniel stood up, his hands raised, trying to defuse the situation. Michael, listen, it's not what you think, he started, but Michael wasn't listening. He took a step closer, his voice rising. Not what I think. You've been sneaking around with my wife, and you're telling me it's not what I think? The tension in the room was unbearable. People were starting to notice, to turn and watch, but no one intervened. I tried to step between them, to calm Michael down, but he was beyond reason. He pushed past me, his focus entirely on Daniel. The argument escalated so quickly, I couldn't keep up. Words turned into shouts, accusations flew like daggers, and then, it happened. Michael's fist clenched, and before I could stop him, he swung. Daniel stumbled back, hitting the edge of the table before collapsing to the floor. Blood pooled beneath him, dark and spreading, and the room fell into a stunned silence. For a moment, no one moved. Not me, not Michael, not the people around us. It was like time had stopped. I dropped to my knees, trying to stop the bleeding, my hands trembling as I pressed them against his chest. Stay with me, I whispered, over and over, but his eyes were already slipping closed. And Michael? Michael just stood there, frozen, like he couldn't believe what he'd done. The sirens came quickly after that, the flashing lights bathing the room in a harsh, unforgiving glow. The paramedics pushed past me, their voices urgent, their movements swift. And Michael? Michael was silent as they led him away in handcuffs, his eyes never leaving mine. I didn't know how it had come to this. How one choice, one moment, could unravel everything we'd built. I thought I could control it. I thought I could keep it separate. But in the end, it consumed us all. That night changed everything. It was the night I lost Michael, the night I lost Daniel, the night I lost myself. And now, every time I close my eyes, I see them, Michael's face, Daniel's blood, the pieces of my life shattered beyond repair. If I'd known how it would end, I would have done everything differently. But that's the thing about choices, you can never take them back. While you are enjoying this interesting story, wouldn't you mind subscribing to the channel already? The sirens arrived almost instantly, their wailing cutting through the stillness of the night. Red and blue lights flashed against the walls of the bar, illuminating the horror of what had just happened. I was still kneeling on the floor, Daniel's blood on my hands, as the paramedics pushed past me. Their voices were calm but urgent, a sharp contrast to the chaos in my mind. They worked quickly, but I could see it in their faces, the way they moved, the way they avoided looking at me. They knew it was too late. Daniel was gone. Michael stood there, silent, motionless, as if he couldn't comprehend what he'd done. When the officers approached him, he didn't resist. He didn't say a word. He just held out his hands as they cuffed him, his gaze fixed on the ground. I wanted to scream, to cry, to do something, but I couldn't move. I was frozen, watching as they led him out of the bar and into the back of a squad car. For a moment, he looked back at me, and I saw something in his eyes I hadn't seen before. Regret. Fear. Maybe both. The days that followed felt like a blur. The police came to the house, asking questions, collecting evidence. I gave them everything, my phone, my emails, the receipts I'd hidden from Michael. They pieced it all together, the messages, the meetings, the affair. Every secret I'd tried so hard to keep was laid bare, exposed under the harsh light of their investigation. They talked to the people at the bar, the witnesses who had seen it all. They told the officers how Michael walked in, how he confronted Daniel, how it all ended in a single, irreversible moment. Their statements painted the picture I'd been trying so hard to deny, a picture of betrayal, anger, and tragedy. The trial came quickly. Too quickly. I wasn't ready to stand in that courtroom, to face Michael, to relive everything that had happened. But there I was, sitting on the stand, answering questions I didn't want to answer, saying things I didn't want to say. The prosecutor was relentless. They painted Michael as a man consumed by jealousy, driven to violence by a sense of betrayal he couldn't control. They called witnesses, people who knew us, who thought they knew us, and their testimonies turned our private lives into public spectacle. And then it was Michael's turn. He didn't deny what he'd done. He sat there, quiet and stoic, as his lawyer tried to explain his actions. A crime of passion, they called it, a moment of blind rage. But the facts were the facts, and no argument could change them. When the verdict came, it felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Guilty. The word echoed in my mind, over and over, as the judge read the sentence. 20 years in prison, no chance of parole. Michael didn't flinch. He didn't cry. He just nodded, as if he'd known this was coming all along. I wanted to speak to him, to say something, anything, before they took him away. But he wouldn't look at me. And as they led him out of the courtroom, I realized that the man I'd known for 15 years was gone. I'd lost him, just as surely as I'd lost Daniel. The aftermath was unbearable. Friends stopped calling, neighbors stopped waving. My family was in shambles, torn apart by the choices I'd made and the consequences that followed. Every day, I woke up to an empty house, filled only with the echoes of what used to be. I thought I could control it, that I could keep my life intact while indulging in a piece of something else. But in the end, it cost me everything. Daniel was gone. Michael was gone. And I was left to pick up the pieces of a life I had destroyed. While you are enjoying this interesting story, wouldn't you mind subscribing to the channel already? I think about it every day. The choices I made, the lies I told, the moments where I could have turned back but didn't. It's like a film on repeat in my mind, each scene more unbearable than the last. I wanted something more. I wanted to feel alive, to feel seen. And for a moment, I had that. But what I didn't see, what I couldn't see, was how much I was risking to hold onto something that was never meant to last. Michael's gone now. Locked away in a place I can't reach. Daniel is gone, too, his life cut short in the heat of a moment neither of us saw coming. And I'm here, left with the silence and the questions that have no answers. Was it worth it? Did those fleeting moments of excitement outweigh the devastation they caused? I don't know. I don't think I ever will. I've spent so much time replaying it all, trying to understand where it went wrong. And the truth is, it went wrong the moment I stopped talking to Michael, the moment I stopped trying to fix what was broken. Instead, I ran. I ran into the arms of someone who wasn't mine to hold, and I tore apart the life we had built. People tell me to forgive myself, to move on, to rebuild. But how do you rebuild when the foundation is gone? How do you move forward when the past still clings to every step you take? I'm still searching for the answers, and maybe I always will be. If there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's how fragile we are. How quickly trust can shatter, how easily love can turn to anger, how the smallest choices can change everything. Infidelity isn't just a betrayal of another person, it's a betrayal of yourself, of everything you thought you were. I don't tell this story to justify what I did or to gain sympathy. I tell it because it's real. Because it's messy and painful and true. And because if someone out there is standing at the same crossroads I was, maybe they'll think twice. Maybe they'll see the ripple before it becomes a wave, before it crashes and pulls them under. Was it worth it? No. Not for a second. If this story resonated with you, or if you want to hear more stories like mine, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Your support means everything, and it helps us bring you real, raw stories that matter. Hit the like button if you found this story meaningful, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's start a conversation, because sometimes, the hardest stories are the ones we need to hear the most.